Hello and welcome to Listen and Learn with Sudbury District Restorative Justice. I'm your host, MJ, and today we're going to talk about the parts of the brain. That's right, that wonderful little jelly like organ that lives inside your head. How much do you know about it really? Your brain is an incredible tool and does a heck of a lot more than you may think it does. Let's get into it. Weighing in at approximately 3 pounds in the average adult, our brains are made up of about 60% fat. The remaining 40% is a mixture of water, proteins, carbohydrates, and salts. The brain itself is not a muscle, contrary to popular belief. It contains blood vessels and nerves, including neurons and glial cells, and is considered an organ rather than a muscle. The brain sends and receives different chemical and electrical signals throughout your body, and these different signals control different processes, and your brain interprets each and every one separately. Some of these signals may make you feel tired and ready to crawl into bed for a nap, while others may make you feel pain or excitement or euphoria. Some messages are kept within the brain, while others are relayed through the spine and across the body's vast network of nerves to distant extremities. Think your hands and your arms and your fingers and your legs and your feet and your toes. To do this, the central nervous system relies on billions upon billions of neurons housed in your brain to carry these signals everywhere throughout your body on a daily basis. The right brain and the left brain. The cerebrum is divided into two halves, the right and the left hemispheres. They are joined by a bundle of fibers called the corpus callosum that transmits messages from one side to the other. Each hemisphere controls the opposite side of the body. Take an example. If you were to suffer a stroke and it occurs on the right side of your brain, your left arm or left leg may be weak or even paralyzed. Not all functions of the hemispheres are shared, however. In general, the left hemisphere controls speech, comprehension, math, and writing skills, whereas the right hemisphere controls your creativity, spatial ability, artistic, and musical skills. It is also thought that the left hemisphere is dominant in hand use and language in approximately 92% of people. The brain and their functions. The cerebrum. The cerebrum is located right at the very front of the brain and is comprised of gray matter and white matter. The largest part of the brain, the cerebrum initiates and coordinates movement and regulates temperature. Other areas of the cerebrum enable speech, judgment, thinking and reasoning, problem solving, emotions, and learning. Other functions relate to vision, hearing, touch, and other senses. The cerebral cortex. Cortex is the Latin word for bark and describes the outer gray matter covering of the cerebrum. The cortex is a large surface area due to its folds and comprises about half of the brain's weight. The cerebral cortex is divided into two halves, or hemispheres. It is covered with ridges and folds. The two halves join at a large, deep sulcus that runs from the front of the head all the way to the back. The right hemisphere controls the left side of the body, and the left half controls the right side of the body. The two halves communicate with one another through a large C-shaped structure of white matter and nerve pathways called the corpus callosum. The corpus callosum is located right in the center of the cerebrum. The brainstem. The brainstem, located right in the middle of your brain, connects the cerebrum with the spinal cord. The brainstem is broken into three pieces: the midbrain, the pons, and the medulla. The midbrain is a very complex structure with a range of different neuron clusters, neural pathways, and other structures. These features facilitate various functions, from hearing and movement to calculating responses and environmental change. The pons is the origin for 4 of the 12 cranial nerves, which enable a range of activities like tear production, chewing, blinking, focusing vision, balance, hearing, and facial expressions. Named for the Latin word for bridge, the pons is the connection between the midbrain and the medulla. The medulla. At the very bottom of the brainstem, the medulla is where the brain meets the spinal cord. The medulla is essential to survival. Functions in the medulla regulate many bodily activities, including heart rhythm, breathing, blood flow, oxygen, and carbon dioxide levels. The medulla produces reflexive activities such as sneezing, vomiting, coughing, and swallowing. The spinal cord extends from the bottom of the medulla and through a large opening at the very bottom of the skull. Supported by the vertebrae, the spinal cord carries messages to and from the brain and the rest of the body. The cerebellum, the little brain, is a fist-sized portion of the brain located at the back of the head, below the temporal and occipital lobes and above the brainstem. Like the cerebral cortex, it also has two hemispheres. The outer portion contains neurons, and the inner area communicates with the cerebral cortex. Its function is to coordinate voluntary muscle movements and to maintain posture, balance, and equilibrium. New studies are exploring the cerebellum's roles in thought, emotions, and social behavior, as well as its possible involvement in addiction, autism, and schizophrenia. Lobes of the brain and what they control. Each brain hemisphere has four sections called lobes: frontal, parietal, temporal, and occipital. Each lobe controls specific functions. The frontal lobe, the largest lobe of the brain, located right in the front of the head. The frontal lobe is involved in personality characteristics, decision making, and movement. Recognition of smell usually involves parts of the frontal lobe as well. The frontal lobe contains Broca's area, which is associated with speech ability. The parietal lobe, the middle part of the brain. The parietal lobe helps a person identify objects and understand spatial relationships, where one's body is compared with objects around the person. The parietal lobe is also involved in interpreting pain and touch in the body. The parietal lobe houses Wernicke's area, which helps the brain understand spoken language. The occipital lobe. The occipital lobe is in the back of the brain and is involved with vision, hence the term occipital. And finally, the temporal lobe. The sides of the brain, temporal lobes are involved in short-term memory, speech, music rhythm, and some degree of smell recognition. Hopefully you're still here with me and I haven't lost you yet, but let's get even deeper into the deeper structures within your brain. The pituitary gland. Sometimes called the master gland, the pituitary gland is a pea-sized structure found deep in the brain behind the ridge of the nose. The pituitary gland governs the function of other glands in the body, regulating the flow of hormones. It receives chemical signals from the hypothalamus through its stalk and blood supply. The hypothalamus. This structure is located above the pituitary gland and sends it chemical messages that control its function. It regulates body temperature, synchronizes sleep patterns, controls hunger and thirst cues, and also plays a role in some aspects of memory and emotion. The amygdala. Small almond-shaped structures, the amygdala is located under each half of the brain. Included in the limbic system, the amygdalae regulate emotion and memory and are associated with the brain's reward system, stress, and the fight or flight response when someone perceives a threat. The hippocampus. A curved seahorse-shaped organ on the underside of each temporal lobe, the hippocampus is part of a larger structure called the hippocampal formation. It supports memory, learning, navigation, and perception of space. It receives information from the cerebral cortex and may actually play a role in Alzheimer's disease. Finally, the pineal gland. The pineal gland is located deep in the brain and attached by a stalk to the top of the third ventricle. The pineal gland responds to light and dark and secretes melatonin, which helps regulate your circadian rhythms and sleep-wake cycle. Yes, friends, it's true. Our brains are amazing, working overtime to keep us safe at all hours of the day, even when we're sleeping. And although it can sometimes feel like there is a disconnect between ourselves and our brains, that little organ is doing the absolute most it can to get you through your day. Like any other part of your body, it's important to keep it healthy. Eat right, exercise, and strengthen and build those neural pathways. Thank you for joining me for today's Listen and Learn. As always, you can find us anywhere online at RJ Sudbury and at www.sdrj.ca.